April 23, 1917, 5:45, north of Arras. Litter Ellis Reed checks his harness with a gloved tug, glances once at the altimeter, and kicks his rudder to keep formation tight. Below him, a ribbon of the Scarpe River cuts through the shell-pocked plain like a torn seam. The brief is simple: climb, find, pounce. The sky is bright and empty, for now. An hour earlier, on a muddy airstrip a few miles away, German mechanics joked as they topped up the radiator on an Albatros D3. "Engländer wieder," one of them said, "the English again," with the confidence of men who have spent weeks watching two-seaters burn. The Jasta's roster board showed victories chalked in neat lines. In April alone, British losses would mount into the hundreds. The tempo looked fixed. The pecking order felt settled. Then something new began to appear at the edge of cloud banks. 3 wings stacked like steps on a ladder, climbing faster than anything they had seen, then dropping at impossible angles. By late morning, contrails and oil smoke wrote a new map in the air. The Western Front had been a laboratory for arrogance. In 1915-16, German pilots flew the Fokker Eindecker with a synchronized gun and harvested slow reconnaissance craft at will. By 1917, Albatros-equipped Jagdstaffeln were the predators of choice, knifing through British formations with speed and dive. Royal Flying Corps crews took off at dawn, flew straight lines over enemy trenches, and came home, or didn't, by lunch. In that world, laughter was a kind of armor. Pilots whistled on the line, mechanics made bets, confidence hardened into habit. It would not survive the summer. The story begins months earlier, in a shed in Kingston-upon-Thames. Sopwith's designers had been chasing a problem: how to make a fighter that could leap, turn, and climb without surrendering its nerve in a dive. The answer, counterintuitive to some, was a third wing. 3 narrow planes, not 2 broad ones, more lift for the same span, better visibility when banking hard, tighter spiral climb. The prototype looked ungainly on the ground, all struts and steps. In the air, it did something else entirely. It went up like a lift, turned in its own shadow, and pivoted nose-high with a precision that made enemy pilots misjudge angles by a fatal margin. By January 1917, the Royal Naval Air Service began receiving the type in small numbers. The squadrons were not many. The total built would remain limited. But concentration matters more than mass when the battlefield is measured in cubic miles of sky. The triplanes' first sorties were not announced by headlines or communiques. They were witnessed in tight circles of men who came back wide-eyed from patrols. Reports filtered upward: exceptional climb, surprising roll, climbs to cloud top in minutes. On paper, the top speed barely exceeded the German Albatros. In combat, speed at the knife edge, while turning, while climbing, while changing energy state, was the difference that mattered. Pilots learned the machine's language. It tolerated abrupt inputs. It liked high angles of attack. It rewarded initiative. It wanted to be flown with the whole body: rudder to swing the nose, elevator to slide into the vertical, throttle to make the pivot stick. Everything after that was timing. Then came the clouds. By April 1917, the war in the air over Arras was a slaughterhouse. Observation balloons fell like empty barns. BE-2C crews died by the dozen. British squadrons flew relentlessly to feed the guns with photographs and corrections. They traded blood for artillery precision. Albatros scouts waited above them, secure in climb and dive. The German control of altitude translated into control of the fight. Every doctrine that mattered rested on one assumption: the high position belonged to the Jagdstaffeln. Now imagine the first time a German patrol, level at cloud base and prepared to dive on a line of British machines below, looked up and countenanced the reverse. Not 2 wings, but 3. Thin, stacked, almost delicate, bursting out of cumulus and rolling into a steep descending turn that bled almost no height. The Albatros pilots shoved their sticks forward to dive away. The triplanes followed, hanging in the vertical as if they had hooks in the sky. The close turned closer. The joke thinned. The human pivot of this story carries 5 names: Collishaw, Reed, Sharman, Nash, Alexander. They flew together as a flight in No. 10 Naval Squadron. They called themselves Black Flight because of the paint on their noses and the names on their fuselages: Black Maria, Black Roger, Black Death, Black Sheep, Black Prince. Their leader, Raymond Collishaw, had the deadly calm that matters at 20 paces. He later wrote about the machine with the clarity of a man who had learned to trust it. He had complete confidence in the Triplane's ability to outclimb and outturn the enemy. He flew it aggressively, using cloud and sun as amplifiers. His men did the same. They did not own the sky. They exploited it. The pattern of their sorties looked like this. Take off into cool air that gives the engine its best numbers. Climb hard on the edge of stall, the three lifting planes grabbing thin air like hands on a ladder. Level at cloud base. Wait. The artillery is speaking. Its thunder marks targets. Reconnaissance flights thread a line toward the front. Escort fighters take station above. Somewhere beyond, albatross scouts form their weave. The triplanes slip into cloud where the compass jitters and the horizon vanishes, then break out with sun at their backs and altitude to spend. The first attack is everything. Each pass must be close, sudden, decisive. The throttle comes back to keep the enemy in the sight. The nose stays high. The wing walk is precise. Guns chatter for 2 seconds, maybe 3, then back into cloud, climb, reset. Micro scene, June 1917. A pair of Albatros D3s slide out of the eastern haze at 12,000 feet. They are comfortable. They see a line of British two-seaters ballooning up from the west. They set for a dive. Then a flicker at the edge of a cloud. 3 winged specks, head on. The German leader snaps left to spoil the angle and pushes down into a shallow dive, expecting to open the gap. The triplane, high alpha and stubborn, sticks to him. The British pilot pulls into a climbing turn that looks unsustainable. The enemy expects the stall. Instead, the triplane corkscrews upward. The sight circles steady across the Albatross's fuselage. Short burst, a puff at the radiator. Coolant sprays. The German's engine runs a minute more, then seizes. He shoves the nose and prays for a field. The wingman circles back and sees a second triplane closing with unsettling patience. Not fast, not reckless, just inevitable. This is not magic. It is geometry and lift. A triplane, with its 3 narrow wings, generates more lift at lower speed with less wingspan. It loses less energy in a hard turn. It can climb steeply without wallowing. Its drag is high at speed, so it is not the best in a flat chase. Straight-line pursuit favors cleaner biplanes. But turning fight and vertical maneuver, that is its home. The German playbook, built around diving attacks and zoom climbs to reposition, begins to fray when the opponent can follow the zoom and still turn inside the arc. Numbers tell the rest. British losses in April remain horrific. No single squadron can cancel a strategic pattern. But where the triplane patrols, the statistics bend. The enemy learns to recognize the silhouette. Caution creeps into briefings. Avoid climbing turns with 3-wing Sopwiths. Do not accept combat near cloud base if triplanes are reported. Tactics always trail fear by a day. The laughter on the line turns into a different kind of banter, the brittle kind that names the new threat. Dreidecker Sopwith, someone says, rolling the foreign word around like a stone in the mouth. The Germans respond the way good engineers do, by sketching their own triplanes. The first prototypes appear in late spring and summer. Fokker's team, burned by earlier failures, returns with a compact, agile airframe welded around a rotary engine. It is not fast. It does not need to be. It climbs like ivy. It rolls like a thrown coin. And in the hands of certain pilots, it becomes nearly unfair. Enter Werner Voss. He interrupts this narrative like a knife through cloth. On September 23, 1917, he meets a patrol of SE-5A fighters from No. 56 Squadron in a sky the color of tin. He flies a Fokker triplane, the German answer to the Sopwith's premise. He seems unkillable for minutes that feel like an hour, sliding and skidding with rudder alone, firing nose on, skipping out of converging traps with a foot of daylight to spare. One of the British pilots, Arthur Rhys-Davids, will later say, "Oh, if only I could have brought him down alive." That sentence, half relief and half respect, seals the moment. The triplane has crossed the front line, not just as hardware, but as a doctrine. What changed when triplanes started falling from the clouds is not just a silhouette in the sky. It is a theory of altitude. On this front, altitude is currency. You buy it with climb rate. You spend it in dives. You invest it by cruising patiently at cloud base, where the cold is a knife and the wind hollows your cheeks. If you own cloud base, you own the calendar of surprise. The Sopwith triplane put cloud base within reach early in the patrol, and after the first burst, again. That loop, climb, dive, climb again without losing the vertical, rewrote the minute-by-minute economy of the dogfight. The macro picture runs through three pressures: reconnaissance, artillery spotting, and air superiority patrols. Triplanes contributed across all three by changing burst windows and forcing German scouts to accept disadvantageous fights or give up attacks on British core machines. Observers reported fewer unchallenged dives by enemy scouts in sectors where the triplanes patrolled. Artillery corrections that might have been interrupted now flowed. A machine that existed in small numbers produced an outsized interruption because it struck the hinge point where tactics met physics. Zoom out to a map. The front from Ypres to Saint-Quentin is a scar. Airfields sit back 5 to 10 miles behind the lines, angled so takeoffs can use the prevailing wind. British patrol lines are plotted on paper with grease pencil. The triplane sector is just one rectangle among many. Yet reports cluster there: enemy driven off, Albatross forced down, patrol returned intact. Some of this is reputation catching up to reality. Some of it is reality outrunning its own explanations. Back to micro. June 1917 again. The black machines take off before breakfast. The air is smooth for the first 1,000 feet, then bumpy as heat wakes the ground. The 5 triplanes climb in a loose V, each pilot minding not the shape but the distance, because spacing is life. The leader raises a gloved hand. Up, they slide into cloud. It is a white cave. Instruments are unreliable. You hold position by faith and muffled engine note. Then daylight tears open. The 5 burst out into blue. Below, a string of Albatross scouts flows across the trench line at right angles. The British break left and descend in a shallow arc, never head-on, always with an angle, and they hit the last pair first, the tail of the snake. The air fills with fragments and cottony puffs. A gun jams. A pilot clears it with a practiced rack of the handle, left hand off the stick for a second that feels like a month. Another triplane takes a hit, fabric peeling, but holds angle, because angle is destiny. The leader fires short bursts and checks his 6 every half second, never trusting the gap behind, then kicks rudder for a vertical reversal that the Albatross cannot match. Another burst. A thin smear of oil on the enemy's windscreen. A wing dips. A spin begins shallow and becomes committed. The fight breaks down into units of 2 and 1. The fuselage becomes the world, the wingtip a calendar. When it is done, the sky feels strangely empty, as if a crowd had fallen silent all at once. Men return from a sortie like that changed, not always louder, often the opposite. The exhausted are quiet, faces raw from the slipstream, eyes set back. The mechanic meets a pilot at the step, with a hand on the cowling, feeling for new shutters under power. The intelligence officer waits with a map and a pencil. Where? How many? What height? Which direction did the enemy break? The answers build a data set. Patterns emerge. The laughing on the other side has stopped, at least where this rectangle of sky is concerned. That is how doctrine shifts, not with declarations, but with the gradual surrender of a habit that no longer works. In the German squadrons, something parallel happens. At first, they try to fight the 3-winged enemy, as they do any other. Retain height, dive fast, zoom climb back to perch. But the Sopwith spiral climb spoils the zoom. Pilots report taking more risk to finish a pass quickly, diving closer before firing, pulling harder on the exit. That means higher structural loads and higher exposure to return fire. Briefings change. If engaged by Dreifach, triple, break, dive, do not climb with them. That change seeds initiative at cloud base. The Predator becomes a raider. Pride summons innovation. Fokker's Dr. I enters service in the fall. Some German pilots become almost mystical about it. But across the line, Sopwith's machine has already forced the conversation. And yet the triplane is not a superweapon. Its limits are real. In a sustained dive, it will not run away from a well-handled enemy. On long escorts, the drag saps range. Its early installations carry a single synchronized Vickers gun. Many enemy scouts have two. Its best work is surgical, not sweeping. The bigger picture improves only when the rest of the system changes. Better tactics, more robust training, improved engines, and new types like the Camel and the SE-5A filling the middle and upper tiers. The triplane is a bellwether, not the sum total. Still, the bell rings loudly. In July, patterns invert in pockets. Patrols that once feared the upper air now reach through it. Photographic missions that once paid blood for the privilege now return with whole crews. The Germans adapt again, dispersing, diving away from cloud rather than diving from it. Cloud discipline becomes a phrase in both camps. Add an eyewitness voice here, because single sentences can carry distances that numbers cannot. RNS ace Raymond Collishaw spoke of the triplane with a pilot's gratitude and a tactician's brevity. He had, he said, complete confidence in its climb and turn, and he used that confidence to force fights on his terms. Another voice crosses from the British Army's most analytical ace. After the Voss action, Arthur Rhys-Davids wrote words that echo because of their restraint. "Oh, if only I could have brought him down alive." That is respect without romance, and it tells you what these little machines did to men, made them rivals who recognize each other across a gulf of language and flag. Let's do cause and effect cleanly. Cause, a design principle. Stack 3 lifting planes to increase lift without increasing span, which increases climb and turn at combat speeds. Effect, control of cloud base in sectors where the type appears. Cause, control of cloud base. Effect, the ability to choose when and how to initiate contact, the ability to disengage vertically, the ability to reset angles repeatedly within a single engagement. Cause, repeated angle resets. Effect, higher probability of short-range, high-deflection shots, shorter, more lethal bursts, fewer indecisive chases that bleed fuel and nerves. Cause, tactical gains multiplied over sorties. Effect, changes in enemy behavior. More caution, more early dives to escape, more aborted attacks on two-seaters. Cause, enemy caution. Effect, fewer losses in the squadrons protected, more photographs returned, more accurate artillery, better infantry planning, real effects on the ground. The mystery we opened with, the sudden appearance of three-winged shapes falling from clouds, unravels here. It was never about an exotic silhouette as such. It was the weaponization of time. A fighter that could climb back to starting conditions quickly could reset a fight 3 times in 5 minutes instead of once. Against a single opponent, that advantage is margin. Against a patrol, that advantage affects the entire group, because the triplane leader can break the formation's center, drag 1 or 2 enemy ships into an unfavorable slice of sky, and bounce between them before the rest can intervene. In this way, small numbers create outsized pressure. Falling from the clouds was shorthand for owning the reset. Now for the inversion, the moment that reframes the earlier scenes. The very thing that made triplanes terrifying to those below, altitude, surprise, vertical maneuver, also made them vulnerable to a new, harder truth. The war was industrializing the air as surely as it had industrialized the ground. Speed at level flight, range enough for long patrols, twin guns standardized, engines that could be built in thousands and maintained in mud. The triplane's quirks, excellent in the hands of experts, could not scale easily. The wave that the Sopwith triplane started broke as Camels and SE-5As took over the line, as Germans moved to D7s and falses, as tactics matured beyond the shock phase. The triplane remains the pivot, not the plateau. Return to Arras, to the April morning when Reed climbed into a sky that belonged to someone else. The week's casualty lists still read like ledger books, emptied in despair. Nothing erases that. But above one sector, the laughter has stopped. The Germans on that strip by the roadside are not joking anymore. They are looking up, squinting into the east, listening for a sound they cannot yet separate from the general roar. Over the next months, they will build their own three-wingers. They will find their own angles. They will carve terrible stories of their own into the sky. In that sense, the triplane did what good weapons do. It forced the enemy to learn. What happened next made the pattern obvious. By autumn 1917, the very mention of triplane meant 2 different machines with similar talents and opposite flags. The British Sopwith carved space for aggressive patrols. The German Fokker turned knife fights into exhibitions of nerve. Both proved a thesis. In a sky governed by energy, the ability to change altitude quickly at fighting speeds decides who writes the minute-by-minute script. The numbers told a different story than the early laughter. Patrol survival rates improved where the 3-winged Sopwith flew. Enemy claims dipped in those rectangles. Ground commanders reported more completed reconnaissance tasks. On the German side, victories clustered around units that mastered the new geometry. What began as a silhouette became a school. The consequences carried forward. Pilots who learned in triplanes became leaders of flights in newer types. They exported a climbing, resetting, cloud-based doctrine into aircraft better suited to mass production. They trained by emphasizing judgment, when to accept a spiraling fight, when to abort a dive early, when to trust a vertical reversal one more time. They repeated phrases that became catechism: angle over speed, cloud is cover and currency, reset or die. The best of them survived long enough to see the war's end. Many did not. The machine had given them an edge. It did not make them immortal. On the ground, infantry felt the difference in small, hard ways. A battery that kept its observers in the air for an extra 20 minutes could finish a mission that otherwise would have gone blind. A colonel planning a dawn attack could count on photographs from the previous afternoon to be current. A company moving up at night might pass under a sky where friendly scouts actually owned the ceiling, which mattered when enemy flares went up and enemy machines iced the roads with machine gun fire. The changing quality of the air, in other words, altered the geometry of the Earth. By early 1918, the Triplanes' visual drama persisted. Posters and newspapers loved it. The machine's public image outlasted its frontline dominance. That is not a contradiction. It is the signature of a transitional technology whose symbolic power exceeds its months in the center. Pilots who had laughed in 1917 were no longer laughing. They had adapted or died. They trained rookies to respect the strange three-winged craft on either side. They altered their own briefings. The new normal was sober. The war itself would outrun all these specific shapes. The industrial sum of engines, metals, fuels, and training regimes would decide the late game. But hard pivots matter in the story of a long war because they compress time. The arrival of the triplane compressed a year's worth of tactical discovery into a season. It forced a revelation. Altitude was not just height, it was leverage. And leverage, used correctly, converts small forces into large effects. Epilogue. After the armistice, surviving pilots walked across quiet fields where their sheds had stood. They looked at the sky the way a man looks into a room where he once fought for his life. Some machines went to museums. Many were broken up by boys with wrenches and curiosity. Veterans told stories to people who could not imagine the physical sensation of spinning in cloud with a dead engine, counting in threes, 1 sugar cube, 2 sugar cubes, 3, because that was how you estimated seconds to impact when your altimeter had frozen. The triplane came up often in these stories because it marked a hinge in the way they thought about fights. It was not kinder. It was not worse. It was different in a way that forced respect. Return to the opening image. The river, the trenches, the sky that felt empty. Now fill that sky with stacked wings sliding out of cloud, not as anomalies, but as announcements. The laughter is gone. The pilots on both sides are professionals staring up at the calculus that will decide whether they eat dinner. The universal takeaway fits in one line. Air power advanced, not through bravado, but through leverage, less through speed alone, more through the controlled exchange of height, surprise, and time. Triplanes falling from the clouds proved it. One last button, simple and true. In a war that made cruelty ordinary, even the shape of a wing could humble arrogance.